Okay, so welcome back to the series where we are trying to create a Hyperledger Fabric project from scratch. Of course, the actual code is coming from the official documentation. We are just trying to simplify the stuff. So here, basically, we were able to create a network where we were able to up the services, the containers, and then we were able to down the services. We were able to create the channel. And then in the last video, we created a channel. We joined the channels as well. But now, of course, you have your channel ready, you have your peers ready on the channel. Now, see, when you have a channel and when you have multiple organizations, you also need some anchor peers. Now, these peers are responsible to spread the data among other peers, right? So, you need to have at least one or multiple anchor peers, depending upon how resilient you want a network to be. So here in this case, what we're going to do is we'll be setting the anchor peers. Okay, so let's get started with that. So to do that, we need to write certain things, right? This video will be a bit complex because when you say you want to set the anchor peer, you are going to change a lot of configuration. Okay, so it's a bit tricky because see, when you want to update a configuration, you have to first find a file, right? So let me just write it here. So we are trying to set the anchor peer, and for that we have to do a lot of different stuff. First of all, we need to get the configuration. Now where do we get the configuration? We have to get it from the orderer, and then we need to update this configuration. Now the problem here is this configuration file which you will be getting from the orderer will be in a .pb file. Now this is something new for us, right? We have not seen a file with an extension which is .pb. Now basically pb is a format which is protobuf. Now this is a protocol created by, or the format created by Google to serialize data. To serialize we normally use XML, right? So we use XML or JSON. But the thing is, when you work with XML, it's very lengthy and it's very slow. So the parsing of XML is slow, and every XML file is actually very lengthy because we have to use tags, opening tag, closing tag to create that hierarchy structure. So to simplify it, they created something called protobuf, which is a bit faster, 10x faster than XML and 10x smaller than XML files. And also, this is a platform or the language independent service, right? So it's not specific to any particular language. So we'll be using protobuf. In fact, it's not like I have a choice because we are using the Hyperledger Fabric. So by default, they use .pb as an extension. So this will be a binary file. So of course you can't edit it directly. So even if you get the file from the orderer, it is actually difficult to edit that file because it's not a readable format for humans. So we have to actually convert this PB format into the JSON format if you want to edit, right? So that's the thing. First you have to fetch the config. So we'll say fetch config. Then you need to translate the config from PB to JSON. So if I can give an arrow. And then once you are done with the translation, now we can update the config. Of course, now we can update because we have the JSON extension, right? It's easy to do that. And then once you are done with the update, you again need to convert this from, we have to translate this config from .json to .pb. Right? Because of course now you want to push it to the orderer. So orderer only works with PB. So basically this is a point where we are deserializing it and then again we are serializing it. Simple stuff, right? So once we're done with the translation, we can push this to push config to orderer. That's it. These are the steps you have to follow to set the anchor peer. Right, and it looks like a simple step, but it's very complex, so just be with me. Most of the code I will just copy paste because it's a lengthy code and we don't have to by heart it, right? Of course everything is available when you want to edit, so it's important for you to understand what is happening there. Okay, now since we have a lot of steps to do, what we're going to do is we will be creating a separate file. So we'll work with a separate file, separate shell script, so that it will be easier to look at and debug. At this point, let me just close all these external files which I don't need as of now, and we need to create a new file and we will be calling that. So after this join channel, we'll be calling that function which is set anchor peer, and we have to do that for both these organizations, right? We have to do it for the organization 1 and organization 2. So we have to call this function 2 times. But if you can see, we don't have that function. So let's create that function here. So after this join channel, I will say set anchor peer. This is a function, and this is where you will simply run this script, which we are going to create as of now. We don't have that script. But also we need to, when you're passing these two values, you have to accept those two values here. So I will save that in organization $1 for the first parameter. And now it's time to create that shell script. We don't have as it now. Let's do it. So the file name is set anchor.peer.sh. Now once you got this file, let's start copy pasting. That's what we do, right? Okay, but first of all, this script may need some environment variables from this environment sh file which we created. I mean, some of the variables, of course. Now once you have that, it's time to start with the steps. The first thing is you need to fetch two things, because when you say you are setting the anchor peer, you will be passing two things. You will be passing the org name, and you will also pass the channel name. And as you can see, we are not calling this file. So let's go back to our create channel, and here let's call it. So we'll be using the CLI format to do that, Docker CLI, to call that script. So we'll say scripts/set anchor peer.sh, and then we'll be passing those two things. We'll be passing the org name, and the org number, and then we'll also pass the channel name. That's it. So when you're calling this, you are passing these two things. So basically when you call set anchor peer, you'll be passing these two things, and we got those two variables here, right? Now once you got those two variables, we'll also need to set up some variables for the CLI, because now we are using CLI, right, for the Docker. So this time we'll be using set globals. I hope you remember we have done this. Have we done that? Yeah. So you can see that we have set global CLI. We'll be using this particular function. So let's say CLI, and the only thing you have to pass is the org number. So we are going for different organization. Of course, you will be calling this file two times, and first time when you call it, it will be 1. Second time when you call it, will be 2. That's it. Okay, not exactly that's it. We have to do a lot of different stuff. Now, what are the steps I have to do? So I have written those steps here. Let me just copy this, and if I cut it here and paste it here, so that we'll have some reference what we are trying to achieve, right? So this is a reference we are trying to achieve. Okay, so we are basically going to first fetch the config, right? In fact, what I will do is I will create a simple function which is create anchor peer update, right? And so let's define this function first. And let me just copy paste the things what this function will do. Okay, so I have not copied the entire stuff, just a simple stuff here. So what we are going to do is, when you say you are creating a anchor peer update, the first thing is you need to fetch the configuration. Remember, we are fetching the configuration. So how do we fetch it? So we have to create a function. This is a function which we'll be creating, which is fetch channel config. And when you say you want to fetch a channel config, you need three things here. The first is the org number. It can also be a name. Then the channel name and the config file. Right now, this config file name is, we have an environment variable. Now the value of this environment variable, sometimes, when you have a value with you, it's easier to imagine, right? So this is org1 msp config.json. Now, how do I know this is the value? So if you go to environment variable, you can see we are trying to fetch this value, right? Which is co-peer local MSP ID. Is it the right? Yeah. So this is a variable which will get replaced with this value, which is org1 MSP, and then we have config.json. But anyway, this name doesn't matter, because in the entire code, nowhere we are going to use this name. Everywhere we will be using this variable. Why? Is because we are going with multiple organizations, so we don't have to change every time. Okay. Once you are fetching it, once you got the file, we will be generating anchor peer update, and for that we need the anchor peer's address, right? So if this is org1, this is a peer which we want to be anchor, and for org2, this is a peer which we want to be an anchor peer. That's it. But once you have defined that these are the peers you want to get, you want it to be anchor peer, we need to set the values. Now how will you do that? In fact, before this, there is one more thing we should do. There is no function defined called fetch channel config, right? So this is a bit difficult. In fact, a lot of functions here are actually difficult to understand. But let me copy paste and see what is happening. So let me just get the fetch channel config function defined. And this is a fetch channel config. Now, if you try to understand this, if you go back to the statements which we have written, so we are trying to fetch the config, right? Now, when you want to fetch the config, of course, you need to know certain things. You need to know which organization you are fetching it for, the channel name, and where you want this config to be stored after fetching, right? Now, how will you fetch this? Now, for that, we have to use a peer command. Now, where do we have you seen the peer command? Yes, and the answer is yes in the last video. If you remember, let me just get this on the screen. Where is my Chrome tab? Okay, not the translator, but peer channel. So if you see peer channel, we have this sub command called fetch, and if you go to fetch, you can see it will fetch certain things about a channel, and one of it is config, right? And that's what we want. We want to get the config from the channel. But then, as I mentioned before, when you want to fetch the config, it is coming from the orderer, right? So we have to also mention the orderer. So basically, if this is a command you have to use, peer channel fetch and then config, then you have to also mention the orderer name. And then if it is coming from the TLS, we have to also mention that. Anything else you have to mention? We have to also mention the channel name. Where is the channel name? The channel ID. And then we have to also mention that we will be using TLS, and then we will be have to also mention the CA file. And luckily everything is there in the environment variable, so we don't have to actually write those names, we just have to use the variable names. And in fact, if you see the code, it's already there, right? So if you look at this statement, it is peer channel fetch config, because you're fetching the config, and this is the name of the config file which we're trying to fetch, the config block.pb, coming from the orderer. This is the orderer address, and then we are using the TLS. This is the TLS orderer, and then the channel ID, and then the CA file. That's it. Once you do this, you will get your config block. But the problem which I mentioned, right? This is in the PB format, which is the protobuf. So if you want to convert that into JSON, we have a rescuer here, and that is the config tx later. I know that's a weird name, but this is a combination of config tx and translator. Okay, I know that's tricky, right? But if you go back to the command, you can see we have command reference, we have config tx later, and if you go up, do we have a full form here mentioned? No? Someone has to write this documentation properly to get the full forms as well. So that will make much more sense. So this config tx later is actually config tx translator. So what it does, it translates between the protobuf and JSON. I mean, of course, from protobuf to JSON, from JSON to protobuf. And to do that, we have command here. So when you say proto encode, it will convert your JSON into protobuf, which is PB. And if you say protobuf decode, it means you're converting it from the PB to JSON. Simple, right? And now, once you know that, let's go back here. So we are using config tx later. We are trying to decode. That means we are trying to convert it from PB to JSON. So we are saying, okay, what is the input file? Input file is PB and the output file is JSON. As simple as that, right? We got a JSON file. And once you got the JSON file, now it's time to update. I mean, it's time to fetch the configuration. Now, if you see this file, it will have a lot of different stuff, right? We don't want the entire thing. We want a subset of it. And how do you fetch a subset of a JSON file? Of course, you can write a code for it, or we can use something called a JQ. Now, JQ is a library. So you will say JQ. Okay, JQ, where is the prompt? I forgot the name of this thing. Is it JQ play? Maybe. Let's go to JQ play. Yeah, that's right. So basically, this is where you can actually, if you have a simple JSON file, you can copy any JSON file here, and you can fetch the values by mentioning the what exactly you want to fetch. And for that, I will use a sample JSON file from Google. Let's go to W3 School and let's fetch any complex JSON here. Okay, so we are on Stack Overflow. Let me just try this one. I've not played with this thing much, but let's try. So what you do is you mention data dot. So you can see when you say dot data, it will return everything. But if you want to fetch one thing, like let's say if you want to fetch about staff, so you can say JSON dot, but staff is an array, right? So you have to mention data of 0. Yeah, now you got only one staff. I mean, of course, you can have multiple staff here, right? This is an array. And then you say dot and you want to fetch the staff. And now you can see we got only staff. And now out of which I just want to fetch. In fact, even staff is an array. So I will say the first value. Okay. And then even out of that, okay, so in that array, we only have one value, right? Which is one type. And that's why you got it. But if you want one type, you can also mention one type here. Maybe you have multiple attributes. Even that is an array. So I will say I want to fetch 0. And you can see we got only one data. Even that, out of which I just want name, so I can say name, it will give me John Doe. This is how the JQ works, right? So you can fetch a particular value from the JSON. Doesn't matter how complex your JSON file is. In fact, we just copied this JSON file from the internet, and I have seen this JSON for the first time, so even it took me some time to parse it. But that's how you use it. So if you go back to the VS Code, so that's what you're doing here. So from this JSON, which is very bulky, we don't want everything, we just want a config, and we need to know the path, which is data, the first value. In fact, once we get the entire config block, maybe we'll try to copy this and try it on JQ Play. Okay, so it's basically a library which will fetch a particular JSON, and you can see we are storing that particular JSON, the small data from the entire code into this output file. And what is this file? The file name which we are sending from here, this one. So this is where it will get stored. Now once you have your output, what you're going to do with that? So once you have your data in this output file, let's go back to create, because this is not complete yet. So let me complete this stuff. Okay, so we'll be using JQ again to create a new JSON file with an update. So whatever JSON you got it from here, we just need to add the anchor pair details, right? So whatever file you have here in the output, you just need to add the JSON data. And for that, we can simply use this statement. So let me copy paste this statement here. So by using this statement, we are doing that. We're actually trying to store the anchor pairs with host and port number to the file which we got from this order, and then store that JSON in a new format. Now this, which is a modified config JSON, is a new JSON data which has anchor pair. So what step we are on now? So we are trying to basically update the configuration, right? So once you've got an update, we still need to do certain things, right? We need to translate this config from JSON to PB, but this will not be that simple. It is a complex process. So what we are going to do is we will be creating a separate function which is going to do that. So this is okay. So basically this is a function, or this is a function which we are going to create, which will update the configuration, right? And we want PB format, not the JSON format. So let's create that function and let's put it here. Now this is a function which is going to update it. Now you can see there are a lot of config translator here, but why we need that? Now first of all, we need to find a difference between the original and the modified version, right? So what we're going to do is, so we need to encode the JSON to the PB, and then we are also going to encode the modified version, the new version, to PB. Now we got both the formats in the PB format, and then we can compute the difference. So this is the config update, right? We don't have to update everything. We just need to update the certain things, right? It is going to have a difference. And once you have a difference, and you can put that into an envelope and send it to the orderer. So we are putting it in the envelope. Okay, we are just putting that into envelope, right? We are not sending it yet. So as you can see, we are able to update the configuration, translate it from the JSON to PB. What is remaining is to push the config to the orderer. And for that, we are going to use another function, which is update anchor pair. So after this create anchor pair update, we'll say update the anchor pair. Okay, but we don't have a function for it. So let's create one. And this is the function, simple function. So how do we update? So we use pair channel update command, and we mention to which order you want to push it. And you have to also mention the file. That's it. Simple stuff, right? I know, not exactly, but this works. And by doing this, I hope we are done with this. In fact, there's one more thing which we need to mention, but I'm not sure when exactly it's getting called. So maybe after some time we'll figure this out. So basically, when you send it, you also need to make sure that your orderer are signing, or the peers are signing the transaction. So for that, we have this particular function, which is sign config tx as peer organization, and peers will sign the configuration file. And we'll try to figure out what exactly it is getting called. Okay, set anchor peer, then the code, right? And I hope we are done with the code. It's time to run and see if this is working from the scratch. So first of all, let me just check if my dockers are running. It's still running. So let me just say ./init.sh down. No such file. Oh, we are in the wrong folder. Okay, network is down. It's time to up the network, and then it's time to create the channel. But this time when you say create channel, it will do the anchor peer as well. So create channel, join the channel, and anchor peer. Everything need to be done. Let's try this. So channel creation done. Next step is submission for the proposal to join channel done. And we got access denied for this script. Okay, so we have to set the permission. We need to set the permission. I should have done that first. Script/set anchor peers. Is that the only error? I think. Again, we need to down the network. So down, up, done. It's time to create the channel. C1, channel creation done. Joining successful. Oh, there is an error. So there is a problem with the channel creation. Oh, sorry, the anchor peer. Maybe I made a mistake while typing it. Once we understood the entire file, let me just copy paste the entire code here. There might be some spelling mistake or something. I'm not sure. Just to be on safer side. And now it's time to clear this. Up the network. Create the channel. Okay, no issue with the channel creation. Joining the channel done. Okay, still there's an error with this CLI. Okay, so one of the error it is now giving is, so basically I tried to debug and see what is going wrong. So now we got an error message and it says that, it is not able to find the core configuration in a config folder. So by default, it will look for these two files, the core config and the orderer in the config folder. So outside this test network, we'll put these two files. Again, I know this is redundant. So basically we have to set the path based on that. But just to understand, we are making it work now. And let me create a third channel, right? And let's try. So I tried for C2, it got created, but then there was an error with the config file. And this time we are using the core config and okay, the same error. Do we got the config? So at least we got the channels, but it will not have the anchor peers. Okay, but we'll solve that later. Maybe I can just copy paste the entire code. But this is a thing, right? We tried to simplify and we are able to crack what is happening. So again, we'll use the Fabric sample project and see what is going wrong there. So in this video, we tried to understand how do we update the anchor peer, not working the way we wanted, but at least we've gone through the code and we got something. So see you in the next video where we'll try to solve this as well. And if not, of course, we can use the Fabric samples project anytime we want. That's it, everyone. Bye-bye.